recording this reading. Welcome again, now that I pushed record. I am recording this reading. It will live on the Kellogg-Hubbard Library YouTube site or YouTube page and the Kellogg-Hubbard Library website. So if you want to come back and see this again, or if you know somebody who desperately wanted to be here and couldn't, you can point them to our website or to our YouTube channel to see this reading. So like I said, we have 4 fantastic readers with us tonight, and I'm going to start by introducing them. The first is Diana Whitney. She writes across the genres in Brattleboro, Vermont, with a focus on feminism, motherhood, and sexuality. Her first book, Wanting It, became an indie bestseller in poetry. A feminist activist in her hometown and beyond, Diana works as an editor and a yoga teacher, and she's the editor of this collection tonight. Rage Hezekiah is a New England-based poet and educator whose poems have been anthologized, co-translated, and published internationally. She is the author of Unslakable, a 2018 Vela Chapbook Award winner, and Stray Harbor. Alison Prine, debut collection of poems Steel, was named a finalist for the 2017 Vermont Book Award. Her poems have appeared or are forthcoming in Plowshares, the Virginia Quarterly Review, 5 Points, Harvard Review, and Prairie Schooner, among others. She lives and works in Burlington, Vermont. Bianca Stone is a poet and visual artist. Her books include Someone Else's Wedding Vows and the Mobius Strip Club of Grief. Her poems have appeared in The New Yorker, The Baffler, and Poetry Magazine. Her newest collection, What is Otherwise Infinite, will be out in the winter of 2022 from Tin House, and she lives in Vermont. What a wonderful lineup we have here. I'm so happy that everyone is joining us tonight. Happy National Poetry Month. Thank you for being part of PoemCity, and I'm going to kick it off to Diana.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's really fabulous to be here. I come to PoemCity almost every year, not in 2020, of course. And so it feels like a homecoming to be back and to be here with these amazing poets from the collection. And thanks to everyone for coming. I'm going to start by doing something that always scares me because it's a digital thing that my teens taught me to do, which is screen share very briefly so you can see some of the images, because this is an illustrated book and the team at Workman and these 3 amazing illustrators did such a beautiful job bringing it to life. So bear with me while I do the tech thing. Okay. All right. So this anthology began a couple years ago, and I wanted to collect the voices I wish I'd heard when I was a teen. My own struggle at that time was with depression, mental health, anxiety, you know, really, really hard stuff. It was kind of that time of life for me that almost remains tender like a bruise when I touch it. So when this opportunity arose, it was clear to me what the mission of the book I wanted to give to teen girls was: you are enough, and to give them resilience to shame. And to also, because the book is divided by emotions, and the first one is seeking. I actually initially thought about calling this doubt, which is a part of seeking, a state of questioning. I wanted to show teen readers that really all feelings are for feeling, and to encourage that self-acceptance and courageous self-discovery. The first poem in the book, in the Seeking chapter, by Stephanie Burt, who's a wonderful trans poet and Harvard professor. It's called Final Exam, Stephanie, and it's a reimagining of her girlhood, what it might have been. Loneliness, which is really an all too familiar part of growing up. And let's be honest, a really familiar part of the past year. I know it has been for me, working at home, having my teen daughters here struggling with loneliness and isolation. And the poems in here really speak to that, not just to the adolescent experience, but to all of us at any time. And this is Franny Choi, her poem Solitude. I hope no one comes to my party, I said out loud. I love that first line. It's these really candid voices. And shoot, I'm trying to move. Oh, there we go. Oh no. Okay, Now I'm like I'm trying to move backwards in the screen share. I just, here we go. Okay. So attitude is the third chapter. And oh gosh, I love this image here of this girl in her bra, and she's got a scar on her belly. And I actually think about my kids, they have to deal with dress code at middle school and high school, which is really body shaming. And a lot of the poems in this book do address bodies and self-acceptance. This is a really fun chapter, probably my funnest chapter to curate the poems in here. And I was so thrilled to have a poem by Amanda Gorman, Black Daughters Pointillism. You can see it's a shaped poem here. Rage. So this chapter also, I feel a lot like that photo still sometimes, but I certainly did when I was 13. And so to give young readers, teen readers permission to feel this and to express it, not to just be a good girl, that it's okay to let it out on the page through writing or otherwise. And the poem, I'm giving one example. There's 8 or 9 poems in each chapter, but for this little overview. And this one begins, if you're gonna storm, I said, do it harder. So there's a real strength, there's a grit in being able to express anger for women and girls especially, I believe. Longing, this is kind of my wheelhouse, and it's actually the chapter that my own poem went in. And I will say I was told by a older gentleman poet who I respect that a editor of an anthology should not anthologize their own poem, but I did decide that I was going to go ahead and do it. Because it's really on topic for me. Longing can be delicious, can be painful, and there's so much of that in the experience of coming of age. And Meditations in Emergency, one of my favorite poems in Longing by Cameron Awkward Rich. Shame, every girl knows about shame. I love this image here, hiding the face, the feeling of being unworthy of love. And when you shine a light on shame, it does dissipate. And so including poems here where readers could see themselves and see that they're not alone and that they're okay. And this is actually an Instagram poet, Nikita Gill, who's a UK poet, Anglo-Indian. And here's her little poem written against shame, How to Stop Apologizing. Sadness. I've been thinking a lot about this image too. I do struggle with depression and cyclically, and I really have since I was 13, and trying to accept that, come to terms with it, and then also find some solace. And I do find solace in reading poets who express this. This poem, What to Say to a Friend Who Wants to Give Up, by J.P. Howard, who's a fabulous queer poet. She lives in Brooklyn and is a real community builder. And this poem is poignant for me because I have been the speaker in the poem. I've felt like I've said this, hold on to either to a friend who's really struggling, or even with my daughters who both struggled with mood disorders, mental health. And also I've been the person who's needed to be encouraged. Last chapter in the book, Belonging. And the idea of putting it last was really about all of these things exist, all of these hard, heavy emotions, and you still belong. And the belonging is, belonging to the earth, as you can see in this image, belonging to a community, but also belonging to yourself, that you can stand in your own ground and belong to yourself. And, that's a kind of a true belonging. Wild Geese, Mary Oliver. This is really one of the poems that inspired the whole collection, that begins, you do not have to be good. And the final poem in the book by our wonderful US Poet Laureate, Joy Harjo, For Keeps. And she's our first Native American Poet Laureate. She's Muskogee Creek. And it's just an extraordinary poem, and kind of gives me that sense of belonging whenever I read it. So I'm going to turn it over to our other poets who are here tonight, and each person going to read 2 poems, and then we'll circle back to me and I'll read 2 poems, and then we'd love to have a discussion and really invite you all to join us. You can put questions in the chat, so think of them as you go along. And I'm really happy to have Rage Hezekiah read now.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be here with you all. I'm going to start with On Anger, which is in the book. On Anger. My white therapist calls it my edge. I hear angry Black woman. She says strength of willful negative focus. She says acerbic intellectual temperament. I copy her words onto an index card. She wants an origin story, a stranger with his hand inside me or worse. I'm without linear narrative and cannot sate her. We perform rituals on her living room floor. I burn letters brimming with resentments, watch the paper ember in the fireplace, admit I don't want to let this go. What if anger, my armor, is embedded in the marrow of who I am? Who can I learn to be without it? Wherever you go, there you are. She asks what I will lose if I surrender. I imagine a gutted fish, silvery skin gleaming, emptied of itself. And the other poem is about when I first started getting sex education in high school and the complexity of that. It's called Sex Education. Virginity was the currency of being wanted. I learned from the local seminarians who preached abstinence in our public high school. By then, my boyfriend's dick had already been everywhere except inside me, his want a tremolo. I'd trained my stamen on Sharpie markers before his mouth was on me at 14. We fumbled in a tent in Arizona, rustling nylon while his parents slept. At school, I watched a virgin unwrap and chew a piece of gum, then spit the wad into her own palm, offering the sticky mound to a boy who refused it on cue. His face a lemon of disgust. Nobody wants someone who's already been used. I crossed my legs, pretending. In truth, I was giddy with power, in awe of how I'd made a boy wither and whimper, my grip firm, his pleasure, my reward. He limped himself malleable. I held him hard like the stick shift of my little red Jetta, my thirst for control of vibrato. Thank you so much.
Wow. That was amazing. I'm the mom of 2 teen daughters, by the way, so we're living some of this. Thank you so much for that sex education poem. Next, we have Alison Prine.
Thank you, Rage, for those poems. Amazing. And thank you, PoemCity, for making this possible, and Michelle and all of you for finding a way for us to still connect with poetry in this weird pandemic year. And mostly thank you, Diana, for this amazing book. I can't even tell you how much I love this book. I remember you saying something about it in the introduction, but I want to go back in time and give this to my teenage self. The things you collected here are the voices are so important. And Bianca, I'm always happy to be in the same space as you and your beautiful poems. So I'm going to read the poem that Diana chose for this book. And it's a poem that I wrote for my mother who died when I was very young. It's called Rearview Mirror, February. My beginning and your ending got so close that all traces of you in my memory lost hold. When I have nothing left to say, I have you, a series of disappearances, a street sign, shade of turquoise, and a formica table. A few decades later, we have hundreds of sadness medications. There's an information machine in everyone's pocket. We have nothing left to say, and we keep saying it. Take my face between your hands. Is this what you expected? I thought I would write this once. And instead, it is every time. When I thought about a second poem to read tonight, I was thinking about the arc of this book, Diana, and I wanted to sort of go from loss, which is a lot of what I write about, to what I reach for, which is love and connection and belonging, where your book ends. And so this is a poem that I wrote about a love that I have had for 27 years now, my wife, and it's a little bit of a coming of age poem when we were just beginning. And it's called Loss, and its antonym. The opposite of losing you was watching you across the purple light of the dance floor in the local gay bar while the salt trucks dragged through the streets. We had our people back then. Janet all night at the pool table, and Kevin by the men's room, a little drunk, smearing his mascara, and our song, an anthem for falling hard into each other's lives. That winter, we proved that being terrified doesn't prevent you from being happy. Even when the guy on Church Street threw a bottle at us and called us dykes on our way back to my place, where we ate ice cream out of the carton at 2 a.m., drunk on our bodies and the snowstorm and a conversation I can't remember, but we're still having it. I want to learn to write about the loves that haven't died. Yellowed paperbacks with broken spines. The stillness of the lake from the fishing pier on winter mornings. The people in this city I sometimes recognize on the sidewalk a decade after our bar shut down. Thank you.
That was wonderful. I love moving from loss to love and connection. Such a good direction. So next we have Bianca Stone.
Thank you, Diana. And yeah, just reiterating what everyone said, which is that this is just such a wonderful book. It's so beautiful. I love the artwork. And yeah, I'm so glad that it's out there for women and men and boys and girls alike. I'll start with my poem that's in here, and it's called Ones Who Got Away with It. I still fantasize I can do something about it. That girl in the outpatient care facility for teenagers confided in me that she'd sneaked out to see a guy at his frat party, and he shared her with his 3 friends to have a taste when he was done. Is it supposed to hurt so much? She whispered to me. I mean, for this long after. She was bulimic and we both hated our mothers. And the next day I said, we should tell someone. And she said, I've talked it over with my best friend. She says I should be proud of it. She was 13 and I 16, recovering from those endless nights, shrieking across the house, out into the yard and into the cold moonlight to wish myself into some other species. The silent stooges, bangs, and thwacks, some self-preservation up against inherited solitude, bent almost in half, the copper piping of my family grief that always raked itself across me until I was deformed by it, until I was defined by it. But damn it, I hope that girl's doing well. I hope she can keep food down and it's nourishing her. I hope her cells are cheering like parents at the stands of a game, even if those men still exist. Important men, I imagine. Men who now run conglomerates and have well-to-do families, or maybe men I see every day at work or whose books I read. And how am I here with my life intact? I'm painful to the touch only when I don't light a candle and praise oblivion, give myself over to nothingness. And is it every day or was it long ago? I'd slid shut my teenage self's veranda doors and stepped onto the world's fancy balconies and was prepared to do something drastic, like live and live and live. The other poem I'm going to read is called The Way Things Were Up Until Now. I'm bored of all the excuses. Bored as Mayakovsky at the Finnish painter's exhibition, barking like a dog through the foreign minister's toast until he cried and sat down. Deadly serious. I am bored as an elegy. I mean, why care at all? Speaking as a pitfall in a world of pits. But we do, to the death. We all agree to garden this year. And my raspberry bushes picked over by wrens, I'll make them great again and let America go wild. It'll be all trumpets and leeks and lilacs from here on out. Let's stop paying for it. Get it free. Let's plan our victory gardens to supplement grief, boost morale, as though something new and uncontrolled were available. It is the original, new, hot future joy. We're making it out of dough. And the illusion of separateness, let it go back into remission. Just look at you. You look like a resurrected child, a serious drama in a cosmic joke, scarred, masked, dangerous. And what of the new Eucharist? How hungry I always am, how I long to lack. Though in Walmart, my heart beats a little faster, and I want the world to heal up. And the world is a field, as if it were indeed flat, curving and caving, as if it were a piece of paper, a Gustave Doré engraving from the Divina Commedia, the one with the silhouettes of Dante and Beatrice standing in front of the blinding, exploding white rose, that you realize when looking more closely is all made up of bodies and wings twisting together. The saintly throng, they call it, mashed and hurtling, an image of heaven and the creation of angels, though it is frenzied as any image of hell around a divine nipple, Odin's lost eye in the well, the drain to the other side, joy that gets more frantic the more you try to quiet it down. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. I really love hearing people's poems in their own voices. So almost once that enters your ear, it changes even how they read on the page in the best way. So I'm going to read my poem that's in the book, and then one other newer one. Like I said, mine ended up in the longing chapter, and it's written about high school, which is why I felt like I could put it in, because it was right on topic. It's called Wanting It. Wasn't I beautiful? Wasn't I desperate? Didn't I give a shit about world peace, inner peace? Only wanting it, secret graffiti spelled out in lip gloss on the locker room wall. The new underwire bit into my ribs, pushed me up, and I caught the mirror, wanted it, cocked a hip, wanted it, front seat, back seat, down on the floor, brag of bruises blooming like plums on my neck, tender, bad, and legitimate. I wanted to ditch it, wanted to drive. Alone in the car for the first time, silence. Such concentration, my hands tongued the wheel. I could see the brushstroke of each yellow line, could feel my tires crush pieces of gravel, and my 10 toes alive inside my shoes, firm and quick on the pedals. There was an orange lodged underneath the clutch. Squeeze it and shift. Squeeze it and there. Those boys who juiced the halls with slouch and threw their bodies around the field, they watched when I punched it to second, third, burned my tracks along the high school tar. They looked at me as if I could kill them. They wanted to kill me back against a locker. I could feel my body jammed up on metal, my skin in ridges where the grates dug in, my skirt hiked up, my muscles like fish, my third eye watching from the outside in. I was some other girl. I was anyone's candy. So I guess like what part of the origin story that I didn't tell when I introduced the book is that I was a closeted queer girl in high school, and I carried a lot of shame because of my sexuality. It was the 80s and the early 90s, and it was not a time in my very small town, little white town in the Berkshires that literally no one was out. Like there was not a teacher, there was not anybody that could be a role model. And I actually responded to that becoming like recklessly boy crazy. And I feel like this poem that I wrote kind of emerged from that. And it's actually, I've realized it also kind of ends with a dissociative image. I was some other girl, and that's kind of how I felt all through high school, looking at myself from the outside in, which I think Brene Brown describes that as the definition of loneliness, looking from the outside in. So I'm gonna read one more poem. It's a newer one. I wrote it sometime in 2020. And I guess maybe just a trigger warning because it deals with sexual violence. And if that's, take care of yourself. If you need to mute or step away, please do that. Watching Thelma and Louise during lockdown with my daughters. Do they get caught? C asks, wanting to know the end from the beginning. Do they make it to Mexico? Do they go to jail? Do they get shot by cops in cruisers and choppers? Just wait, I say. I've already messed up. I forgot the scene in the parking lot. The predator at the honky-tonk bar slapping Thelma in the face, shoving her belly down on the hood of his truck. The click of his belt unbuckling. It was 1991. I hadn't been raped yet. I kept the thrill of the open road, Brad Pitt strutting in cowboy jeans, Louise fierce and bold in her gritty bandana, blowing up an 18-wheeler. That was power, I thought back then. Do they make it? C asks again. She says the women are stupid. They should switch cars, hop a train, stop calling home to Arkansas. She is sure she could survive if given the chance. A is quiet. Oh, I know, she breathes softly as they near the Grand Canyon. At the end, the green car floats above the earth. Tears trace my cheeks, and I take the girl's hands. Thelma and Louise are holding hands too. This is the only way, I try to explain. They have no choice, not in this world. It's the movies after all. The Thunderbirds suspended forever in Arizona sky, a magic feminist ride to the afterlife while we're stuck here on the ground, in the couch. Oh my gosh, in the house. I don't even know where the other part went. And it's dark, dark, dark all around. The future pressed hard against the windows. Thank you. Whew. So that was really interesting. And the second page of my poem didn't print out, and I just read it from memory. We'd love to welcome your Q&A. If you have some that you would like to put in the chat, or if you feel comfortable unmuting, you could do that. And as we get started, I thought I would ask a few questions to the poets, and you can kind of warm up and see if there's anything you'd like to ask. So I want to ask, when did you start writing poetry? And do you remember your first poems? And did you share them with anyone?
I think I said, we were chatting a little before. I started writing poems when I was 9, and I do remember them. I will not recite them as I did earlier when we were just chatting amongst ourselves. But I don't remember sharing. I remember writing poems from the age of 9, and I don't really remember sharing poems maybe until I guess I remember sharing some in high school. So, you know, maybe 10 years later. But there was a long period of scribbling them in journals, and still the vast majority of what I write, nobody ever hears.
I started writing. I mean, I'm a journaler. I kind of feel like that was my entry into writing. I started writing poems in the 8th grade, and a few years ago, I participated in Mortified, which is like a stage show where people read their teenage journals aloud, and I read some of the poems that I had written as an 8th grader, which were like just horrible goth, you know, like a like nature's concubine kind of like silliness. I was really into Lady Macbeth at the time, so it was like that moment. But yeah, I didn't start actually sharing poems until probably college and graduate school.
Well, I had sort of a unique experience because I was raised by my grandmother and my mother, and they're both writers. And my grandmother was like a working poet, so I got to go to like readings and sit in on her workshops and stuff. So I was exposed to poetry really early, but I remember, and I was writing it all the time too. Just I had a lot of fun doing it, but you know, when I started to get older, probably around 9 or 10, I started to want to like participate more in a more adult way. And I remember my grandma would have like, you know, students and colleagues over, and they'd be like reading new poetry in the living room. And I finally decided I was going to read a poem to everybody. And I was like, they really wanted me to. But I remember just being terrified actually when it came down to it. And I had to hide in the bathroom while my grandma read my poem to them. But I really liked that like excitement of the embarrassment and all that. So, you know, and I've been writing poetry my whole life, and it's like, it's been such an interesting trajectory of like, emotion, like getting up on stage and reading. I've gone through so many different phases of that experience. And yeah, but it's like a never ending like learning experience, you know, writing things down and sharing them in front of people. But that's what's so fun about it. It's like, it's kind of amazing, you know, listening to what we're reading. It's like, wow, it's taken me like so long in therapy to like talk about some of these things like in a real world way. But like, you know, I think about it, I'm like, I've been talking about really hard, intense shit in my poetry in front of like so many strangers for so many years. They're just so different. That's all.
Yeah, that actually leads to another question that I had, but I love that image of you hiding in the bathroom, like simultaneously thrilled and really embarrassed as your poem was being read. I didn't share my poems. I actually I wrote these like long fantasy fiction stories like all through my childhood. And I think it was really middle school, or we called it junior high, when I had a lot of heartbreak. And that's where I wrote poems like you, Rage, in my journal. And they're very private. The first one I really remember sharing was with my mom, and she was so generous. It was a really sappy poem that was an ode to the Beatles, where I wove like all their song titles in, like I've wandered through your strawberry fields. I mean, it was really like, if I read it now, it's just cringy, but it's like also so sweet. And she just, you know, told me she loved it, which if you're ever wondering what you should say to a young poet, like just tell them that you love it, at least at that age. But I didn't share my poems in high school either. I had a couple of great English teachers who encouraged me, but I didn't share with my peers really until college, and that was a turning point. So here's a question, and I don't know if it's too deep, and feel free to, you know, take it on a tangent, but it's, how can poetry help us reimagine our personal experience, our personal history through language, or transform a painful experience from the past into something different? And however you want to answer that. I mean, I think for myself, I remember actually first reading Alison's poem that was in the book. I read her whole book, Steal, like really during a very dark time. And my mom has advanced Alzheimer's. And I think it was during like a really a period of intense decline, and trying to accept that to read somebody else's poems about grief was such a powerful experience. So yeah, how do we transform this, or how do we reimagine through language? How does that work for you?
I think for me, writing about hard stuff has really helped free me from shame, like just getting it on the page, you know, similar to what Bianca said, like things that I don't really want to talk about, but I'll write about them and then publish them. And then it's just like, well, that's out there. And there's kind of there's a freedom in that for me. And I think it has been really healing for me to be able to just be honest about what those experiences are, and to be willing to put them out there. And what I've heard, you know, I think it's been so surprising to me reading about things that feel so secretive and shameful. And what I hear back is me too. And that's the magic of reading poetry for me as well, is that I feel less alone.
Diana, it's interesting that that the poem that you chose for the anthology was a poem that I never thought that I would ever share with another person, because it was one of those poems that I had no sort of objective feeling about it or sense of craft. It was just like one of those like necessary poems that you write because you have to. And I remember when I was putting together my manuscript for Steal, like those, like I kind of like hid it in the back of the manuscript somewhere, and you know, had a couple of people read my manuscript to help me out, and they were like, why did you hide all the good poems in the back of the book and put these other poems that aren't as good in the beginning of the book? And I realized like the rawer and the more authentic the feelings were that I wanted to hide were the more powerful poems. And I think that's the, you know, and I do think that like also for me, reading poetry has the same effect for me as writing it. So when I read those sort of raw and vulnerable, honest poems that other people have the courage to write, then it does the same thing for me as writing. And I feel like that's how you you know, sort of that's how the whole process of poetry to me is like this equal balance of reading and experiencing other people's vulnerability and then diving into your own. But I was really touched that you chose that poem, because it was one of those poems that I really wrote just for me, which probably, you know, of course means that it ends up being the kind that really connects.
Yeah, I'll respond. Like, there's one line in that poem which to me feels like the essence of grief, which, you know, I think it's the last two lines. Like, I thought that I would write this once, and instead it is every time. And yeah, my dad died right before my first baby was born. And so there's that cyclical feeling of grief. Like, it's not like, oh, you do the work and you do the mourning and then it's over. And I felt so seen by that poem, especially at the time when I was reading it. So yeah, that's what I wanted to bring into that to the readers of the book. Bianca?
Yeah, I you know, poetry is so unique because it's you know, it's dealing with truths, more so it's concerned with that more an emotion than language, more so than it is with narrative or information passing. So I think for the very reasons that we can't talk about certain things, poetry becomes a perfect vessel for those conversations, because you can use ambiguity and negative capability and like and fantasy, really. So I think the imagination is really important in having uh escaping your own sort of chaos that you're feeling. I know I've been thinking a lot lately, there's when I feel like this like chaos within myself, this anxiety, um and then I read a poem. When I start reading a poem, it all goes away. Like I never feel anxiety and chaos really when I'm reading a poem. And it's not that anxiety and chaos isn't in the poem. It is. It's on the page. It's not in me anymore, and I get to connect with somebody else. And um, it's really hard to find poems that do that for you. And it's like, you know, we expect all poetry to do that for us, and it's actually like very specific and unique. You know, that's why it's great to have an anthology, because you can, you know, look through it and find poems that speak to you, and then like pursue that person further. But yeah, I just find that writing, you know, and writing poetry is like different than reading it for me, because I mean, it's what I love about good poetry is what I love, you know, I try to strive for to achieve in my own poetry. Um, but writing it can be difficult, emotionally and just technically frustrating. Especially the poem like the one that's in this anthology for me was like, and I'm every time I read it, I'm like, I'm not reading this poem ever again, because I just feel like it's too hard to write about that. And you know, it's but you know, that's just what it is. It's like you have to have those poems that you hate, that you can't bear to look at anymore. But and you got to try, and you fail, and then you try again and do it better. But
that idea of the chaos and maybe embracing the chaos and then finding some calm and reading poetry, I really hear that. And there's actually a question about that Kelly says, I would love to hear about your process for selecting the poems for this anthology, such a diverse collection of voices, both familiar and new emerging. So I'd love to answer that, and actually even like describe how I've even chose the poems from the poets who are here. So like Bianca, I had your book, I had the whole Mobius Strip, Club of Grief, and there were like a few strong contenders. I mean, often when I knew that there was somebody whose voice I needed to have, that I just felt intuitively that I wanted to bring that, it was hard to decide which one. And sometimes I felt it in the body, like, yes, this, and it's kind of a like an exhale. And sometimes it was like putting a puzzle together. Because I worked with my wonderful editor who is here tonight. Hi, Mary Ellen, thank you for everything. Because we had this format, the structure of the 8 chapters within the book and those emotions. So I had to slot poems, into that emotional experience. And I think for me, by the time I found ones who got away with it, like I needed some more complicated poems that addressed anger. And then I'm a survivor of sexual assault, and I'm now the mother of a survivor. And so it was really important to me. I'm also like an advocate and an activist, that I not shy away from that kind of that darkness that many people don't want to acknowledge is, is part of our world and is the world of teen girls. If it's not you, then it's probably your friend or your cousin. And so I guess in my selection, by the time I came to that poem, it spoke to me so much. And then the insistence at the end, live and live and live, like that was the message that I wanted to end with. And so that was some of my process, was like engaging deeply with the poems themselves, but also how they connected with the other poems in the book. And Rach, I think I also had a few poems that I found of yours. To be honest, like I don't even, if there are poets who I didn't know ahead of time, I might have just heard their name. And then I went and I researched, and the internet is an amazing place. And there's, poets.org, poem a day. I think it's possible that your poem was on that. It became a really good resource for me. And I had spreadsheets and, things that I would narrow down. And so that also was clear to me that I wanted that anger poem. I wanted the presence of the white therapist and that image at the end of the gutted fish. I think that's what poetry can do. It's like, it may be about a topic, but what it can do with an image is, is really extraordinary. So I guess those were, often the poems that I gravitated towards. And I was also looking, I think some people believe that accessible is like a dirty word in poetry. And I don't really believe that. And especially writing for the YA audience, I wanted poems that you didn't need to have special training to be able to access, to be able to read and understand. And like I said, Alison's, so I actually, for just over 4 years, I was a poetry columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle. And I read a lot of contemporary poetry for that, because I was writing these roundups of like 3 or 4 poets every month. And I can't tell you what happens once you become a reviewer. Books just arrive in your mailbox like every day. And it's actually becomes like a terrible source of guilt, because you can never read them all. And then you have to like find out what to do with people's poetry books. But a lot of the poets in this book I discovered while I was reviewing. And so I knew that I wanted to come back to them. And yeah, the question of diversity, I also knew from the beginning that I wanted this really to be diverse and inclusive in a very concrete way. So I was looking by identities too, and not in a sense of like having a quota, but like, no, I need some more Indigenous voices. I really wanted to include trans poets from the beginning. And I felt like I did that. I also learned and made some mistakes along the way too. I had some blind spots. I didn't include any disabled poets in the sort of my first draft until a disabled artist friend was like, hey, we're disabled poets. And I had to see my own biases there. and I kind of had to be willing to make mistakes and mess up and apologize and like move forward as the editor. But that's a great question. If people have other questions, please go ahead and either say them or put them in the chat. What I would love to hear from the poets here is what poets did you love when you were younger, like either as a child or a teen, or what books in general, like what did you read that you loved? I know, Rage, you said Lady Macbeth, but yeah, I'd love to hear that. And if anyone in the audience wants to share as well, go ahead.
Diana, before we talk about that, I just want to circle back for a second about you putting yourself in the book. And I want to say that I think they're probably, whoever the older male poet who told you that editors don't do that, I think there's probably a good reason why they shouldn't at that time. And I think there's also good reasons why you should have at this time included yourself and your own voice in this particular book. And I just feel like that it was important that your poem was there and that you, I know that when the original outline for tonight's reading, you weren't going to read, and I was really happy that you decided to read tonight. And you're a person who has labored for years supporting and reading and experiencing other people's work and truly listening so deeply to other writers and lifting them up. And that's like this book, like I can only imagine the labor of this book and the listening and creating that went into it. And I just really want to celebrate your decision to just have one really important poem of your own in the book. And I think that it's, I have to say, like, in terms of words, like my least favorite word in the world is inappropriate. Like, I hate that word. It's used in so many terrible ways. And I just want to celebrate you for putting yourself there. And I will say that when I thought about this question about poets that you love, I was thinking, and I don't even know how these books came into my hands, probably some amazing English teacher, but it was Anne Sexton's Transformations, Sylvia Plath's Ariel, and Gwendolyn Brooks' collected poems were the three books that I got in high school that changed my life.
Amazing. I only wish I had gotten those in high school. Thank you so much for that acknowledgement, because I did struggle. I think you're probably right, because it was somebody older who said not to. And I actually did talk to a few other editors, like my friend James Cruz, who's also a Vermont poet, and he anthologizes his own poems without apology. And we had a good, honest talk about it. But I also felt
so did Charles Simic and Mark Strand and all the others.
Yeah.
I mean, it's done all the time. This person, whoever this famous older male poet is, he doesn't know everything.
I think he actually
Let's start taking bets on who it is.
Everybody knows him, and I love him dearly. And I think he actually changed his tune later on and maybe sent me an email like, oh, I'm not sure I meant that. But I took it to heart, when I first asked, because I was nervous.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I would too. I would stress about that so hard. I would lay awake at night stressing about it. Like, if I didn't do it, I'd be so pissed at myself. And if I did it, I'd feel like I fucked up, So there's no winning. You did what you wanted to do was obviously the right choice.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. I didn't read like Sylvia Plath until college, and so I just it was like Robert Frost and those guys, and I mean they're great, but I'm a little Emily.
It's always Robert Frost.
I know, and he's like right here on my bookshelf. I mean,
you have to come back around to Robert Frost like way later in your poetry career. Like, you're like, oh, he's actually good. Emily Dickinson too. You're like, oh, she's a genius. It's funny, but my obviously grandma was like my number one like person, but I had two poets that I loved in high school, and it was Sylvia Plath. I had mom got me her like collected actually, and the collected Yeats, and somebody I really loved gave me this Yeats book, and I loved Yeats and Plath. Those are my two, and Grandma were like my two. And then when I got to college, I was like, oh, the New York school, like there was so much that I was like in a bubble for sure, but it was a good bubble.
A great bubble. What about you, Rach? What did you read?
I think when I was in middle school, we read The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, and then I became totally obsessed with her and read all of her poetry, Woman Hollering Creek, and there's another one. But yeah, there was an anthology that was in my house that was a bunch of collected writing, and I remember reading Daddy by Sylvia Plath, and just like at a very young age and being like, what the actual fuck is going on? So that was really, I feel like that really opened my mind to like what was possible as far as poetry.
Me too. I think when I first read Sylvia Plath as like a freshman in high school, I memorized Daddy, and I would like walk around campus like, you do not do anymore, black shoe. Like I was really, it was this expansive. So yeah, and I guess I'd want the question is just like how have your reading changed? I like that idea of like coming, because we're almost finished, but like coming back around to Robert Frost, like how have your reading tastes changed as you've gotten older?
Well, like I was saying, I had a good poetry education, but it was like very limited to like the kind of Galway Canal, Sharon Olds, like wonderful like 90s I don't know, more like narrative poets. And then when I left for college and went on to grad school, it was just a constant learning experience for me. And I started reading a lot more of the New York School poets, and people like James Tate and John Ashbery became like two major poets for me, and Anne Carson as well. And Anne Carson was not someone it was on my radar at all till I was like in grad school. So that was a late education for me, and that's really taken me to where I am now, which is, I'm always looking for poets I love. Right now I'm like very into like, I'm just like really into white guys right now. I don't know what it is, but like Larry Levis and I keep wanting to say Charles Wright, but it's his son, Franz Wright. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm all over the place.
Emma, do you want to ask a question?
Yes. I don't mean to like butt into this question right here. I can wait until after.
No, we want to hear.
Okay. Well, I mean, I am a teen poet. I'm 14. And I was just wondering, like, it seems like most of you have like come of age on poetry and writing poetry. And I was just wondering how your experience with writing and poetry changed after that and how you look back on it now.
Great question. Does anyone want to jump in?
Sure. So the question was how it's changed the early writing to writing now. I just want to say, Emma, I'm really glad that you're writing poems. I think for me, it went through a lot of ups and downs. Like at first I wrote in this like really pure personal way that was just for me. And then there was this like really rocky transition of like sharing my work in the world. And that's full of like mortifying, terrifying, embarrassing, vulnerable experiences. And I had no callous for like getting feedback, which obviously you need in order to become a better writer. So at first I would just feel like completely destroyed whenever I got any feedback. And I didn't get formal training as a poet, so it was sort of came later in life. But then eventually, like after I was completely destroyed by like getting feedback, which I didn't know how to deal with, I eventually learned to like realize that when someone was giving me feedback on a poem, they were helping me. And now I am like completely the opposite. Like I practically want to stop people on the street and be like, what do you think about this word? Like, would you think this word would be better or that word? Can I just read this to you? Like, I just want to crowdsource my poems with like strangers all the time. Like, I just want everyone to hear my poems and talk about them with me. And I'm totally willing to put them out there and like get the hugest feedback anywhere. So I feel like I've come full circle, but I think that the original courage is to write it. And then eventually the courage is to share it. And then you have to like build some kind of callus so that people can discuss with you. Although I remember one time I got to have dinner with Tracy K. Smith, who was a poet laureate, and she's brilliant. And she told me that she never shows her poems to anyone except her husband until her whole manuscript is done, which is obviously the opposite for me, who's stopping people at the bus stop to read it to them. So I don't know that there's a right or a wrong way to do it, but I'm glad that you're doing it.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, the trajectory from like youth to now, I mean, it's just been so much. You just learn so much as you go. And like writing is a lot about time, and like the more you write, the more easier it is to discern what's good and bad in your own writing. So like that was the most important evolution for me, is like I'm at a place now, I'm like 37 years old. I'm finally at a place now where I'm able to like understand more clearly like what's working and what isn't. But it's taken a really long time to do that. So it's like a lot of experimentation that happens, and hopefully never ends, God, because then which a lot of people stop experimenting and it's bad, it can be bad. But I feel like, Emma, you're so like on it already. You're like killing it. I love everything you do. But like just doing what feels right and like reading what speaks to you, like not what everybody else is reading or anything like that, and then your tastes change all the time, and like you move on to other things and you go back to other things, and it's just fun. There's so much out there to explore, and there's so many different places to go in your writing, just like Alison was saying, like building a small community of writers, even if it's just two people, like is like crucial, like you have to bounce your poetry off of other people, and having a secure group, having one person you email with, like it's great. You have to have that if you want your poetry to like leave your journals and like communicate with other people in the world. You have to do that, because they're not going to come find you in your room ever, except your mom. Bless her.
That's great. I feel like maybe we should, I know I'm conscious of the time, everyone's time, and your Friday night. I feel like that's a good, really wise place to end, about finding poetry community, and finding those like trusted readers. And it only takes one or two. So anyone else have any last things? I'm so grateful to PoemCity for hosting us, and to everyone who showed up on your Friday, and of course to Alison, Rage, and Bianca. And I think I put the link in the chat if you want to get the book. But if you're in Vermont, it's at all our local indies, and it's at Bear Pond and Montpelier, and it's here in Brattleboro at Everyone's Books and Antidote Books in Putney. So yeah, really grateful, and take care. Have a wonderful spring.
Thank you,
all. That was amazing. Thank you all.
Thank you, Diana.